Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel. We're just an hour late today. Didn't have to be a full hour late, but I figured it would be easier for everyone if I start right on the hour. Today we are talking about Civil Gore. That's right, Civil Gore, which is our special Halloween Kriegsspiel that was put together by Damon Mosier of the International Kriegsspiel Society. He put together the module, built all of the pieces, and set everything out for us. And he was going to run the game, but he had to work. He works in Hollywood, so well, what do you do? You know, you got to kind of catch as catch can in that industry. So he asked me and if I would run it, and I agreed. And I promptly butchered the rules, but I also butchered much of Washington, D.C. So mission accomplished, right? So we're going to talk about this scenario, and it's about cooperative Kriegsspiel and fun Kriegsspiels, because a lot of times when you run a Kriegsspiel, certainly it's adversarial, which is an important aspect of the game. You know, the fact that you have force on force and it's played double blind. This year, not being played double blind, being played cooperatively. You could play a cooperative blind scenario. Um, but we didn't. This time it was just all about kind of having fun and messing around and so on. And so uh, it produced an interesting result. So let's talk about Civil Gore. Here we have the defenses of Washington. Uh, Sleep safe and sound in the White House is President Lincoln, protected by a bodyguard of cavalry, and the entire city ringed by defenses. So here we have all of our troops ringing the defenses of Washington, D.C., inhabiting the fortifications. We have fixed batteries, plenty of stuff. If the Confederates were to try to attack, they would be torn to shreds. Okay, and of course the year is 1864. It is October 31st of 1864, and the Confederacy is in dire straits. They are about to lose. So according to our lore, what happens is Jefferson Davis takes a trip down to New Orleans, visits with a voodoo priestess, and gets her to raise an army of the undead, which we see right here. There we go. Zombies, my friends, zombies. All right, so you'll notice we have a few different kinds of zombies. There's two here. There's another one, which is the Union officer. I think only one of these came out, but they all look the same except for the coloring. No big deal. But we started out with these black zombies, and they represent the Confederate dead that had been raised initially to march on Washington. And the thing with them is they are slow. They only move 2 squares, as opposed to the Union zombies, which of course are fresh. And we'll talk about why that is and how that works. So we used kind of an ad hoc variant of the brigade system. That's something I'm going to be talking about next week in a special episode of Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiels for our Patreon subscribers. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the dice works and how the ACW brigade system works. But that's just for the subscribers only, and that will be coming next week. If you want that, you need to subscribe and become a Patreon supporter, and you will absolutely get the down low on that. You can also, of course, join the International Kriegsspiel Society and learn to umpire and play, and we teach you, of course, for free. So there you have it. But if you want it next week in easy encapsulated form, the best and fastest way to do that would be to subscribe. Okay, so let's see here. We have in the initial situation, I started zombies kind of trickling in right here on this axis of attack. Why? Well, it was kind of an exposed forward position, if you will. I felt it was kind of easy to do it. So what happens is civilians start running in, and that's these little white tokens that you see. These here, okay, here's your civilian. But if you flip it over, the civilian is tripping out, right? So the civilian tokens start streaming in. Scared, we flip them to terrified side or whatever, and we have them streaming in. And so right away, the player who's here says, "Okay, let's get off the dispatches. Let's figure out what's going on. Maybe it's a Confederate cavalry raid or so on, right?" Well, of course, it's zombies. And initially, the forces at Fort Ethan Allen did an amazing job holding off the zombies. Partly because they have these emplaced guns, they're dialed in, they are just shredding the zombie attackers one after another. So I started to increase the number. I went from one to two at a time to three at a time, and even at three at a time, they were destroying them. They were firing like four spaces out and just absolutely nuking these guys. And what was really required of the zombies was to kind of spread out across the front and attack. And eventually they did. Eventually they got like right here on the wall, and they were able to climb up the wall and flip these batteries. Now, the way I ran the game is whenever the zombies made contact with enemy forces, the unit would flip over like this just to indicate that the men are no longer fighting. And then a turn or two later, they would turn into a zombie themselves. But they would not turn into an ordinary zombie. They'd turn into one of these, a Union zombie. And the difference is these regular zombies only move 2 squares, okay, 800 paces in a turn, which is not particularly fast, and that's why the batteries were able to keep up. But once the Union zombies were created, well, they could move 4, which is twice as fast. And so the end result of this particular rule interpretation on my part was that as soon as a zombie made contact with any unit inside of Union lines, it began to burn like a slow fuse. So one unit would flip, and then the neighboring units would flip, and so on until the entire force is converted to an army of Union zombies. And let's see, we'll illustrate that by just grabbing a bunch of these guys. And, well, we didn't grab very well. We'll grab a bunch of these guys, and boom, all of a sudden you have this. It goes from this right here. Let's erase that marking. So you go from this here to this right here, and that's the situation. So over time, the civilians began to kind of pile into Washington, and we had additional attacks. It wasn't just here. We began to do attacks here. I was assisted by Peter Fryer of the UK Kriegsspiel group, and they began to attack this way and then this way, and eventually there was a few that came in this way. But this particular attack up here was actually the first one to flip units, and it was a very strong attack in these two locations. Like, Peter just kind of went wild with the zombies. He was like the Salt Bay dude, just doing that with them. And they they came in tremendous numbers. And once there was a hole here in the center, it became very hard for the Union to defend. What they began doing, of course, is they began defending in layers. They would fall back. They fell back here. They kind of tried to defend there. They tried to defend there. This unit here fell back almost immediately on contact. I mean, they fell back very quickly. These troops here, again, this line was rolled up very slowly. At one point, they tried to blow up the bridge here, but they were unable to do it. They rolled, I don't know, like 8 or 16 dice at that bridge, and none of them came up hits, which is really quite too bad for them. But the zombies were able to get across the bridge and flip all of the Union forces here. Those that were already flipped, which were a lot of the Union zombies, they ended up in the water, and because they couldn't get across the bridge all at once, they began floating downriver, okay, this way. And Lincoln, of course, not knowing what was going on and being kind of this kind of guy who wants to see for himself, Lincoln had come up to the front to see. He had activated the cavalry and ordered them to come on up. And the cavalry helped to make a stand here at these two locations. But eventually all these units were flipped. Here we had Felix was running this division here. We had a zombie attack in this direction. Felix actually did a really good job holding them off. He did really good job. He was probably the most calm, level-headed, least panicked player out of absolutely all of them. He did brilliantly holding them off. But eventually, of course, they did make contact with his line. Knowing the effect of that, he began to retreat. He also retreated, withdrew across, and eventually, the inhabitants and people of Washington, D.C., including the president, Congress, most of Congress wasn't sure. They had to debate it. They couldn't really pass a decision to whether to evacuate the city or not. The Supreme Court and others, and a fair number of civilians, eventually made it out of the city to safety. However, Washington was ultimately turned into the abode of the undead. In fact, let's take a look at the final state. And here, nope, that's not the final state of the game. Maybe it's this one. One of these autosaves has the final state of the game. Try this one. I thought. This is pretty close. This is pretty much it. We renamed the reservoirs, of course. Instead of distributing reservoir, it was disturbing reservoir. And deceiving, instead of receiving reservoir, it became deceiving reservoir. That's what that indicates. Lots of fun. But here you have it. This is pretty close to the end situation. Yes, and see the zombies have flipped an entire line. They're about to go to work on these batteries here. Pretty grave situation. Need to dig into that. And here we are. So it was, of course, a total zombie victory for the most part, as we expected. But curiously, there was a unit here in the fortification where our very own scenario author was ensconced, and his position was never attacked, nor did his troops come out to help. So there you have it. They didn't get orders, right? What do you do? So, but here are the rescued civilians, President Lincoln, and one Union general who actually did not survive. He blew himself up on the bridge to prevent the zombies from crossing. Of course, the zombies would simply float down the stream and wash up on the beach and go to work, but we ended this scenario. So there you have it. That's Civil Gore, and that's how the scenario unfolded. So, I mentioned that this is a cooperative scenario, and there's a couple different ways to run a cooperative scenario. One is you can run it in the traditional fashion where you have kind of everybody distributed into their room. And then the other way to run it is you allow everyone to sit around the table and kind of chat and hang out and whatever. When you allow everyone to sit around the table, which is what you would do in a face-to-face Kriegsspiel anyway, you then have to decide, do you limit conversation to small talk and chit chat, and then they can only talk about the game when they're next to each other, according to strict Kriegsspiel rules, or do you allow them to just kind of talk and whatever, just they can say whatever, they can talk about the situation. They technically still cannot act upon what they would not know about, but they can advise each other and talk, and I think that's fine, and that is what I allowed. I went with that very liberal, loose interpretation where I allowed them to kind of talk and they could strategize and say, oh, no, pull back here, pull back here. The only danger with allowing that, especially when you're doing that in a game that's intended to be played for fun, is you want to make sure you don't have one player running the board. You don't want to have one person dictating to everybody else what they should be doing, what their turn should be, because then they micromanage. Then the other people don't have fun because they're not really playing. They're just following direct orders from the person who is running the table, the fellow gamer. Which we've all had that experience when we played games with people who are more experienced. You want to avoid that. Our group, however, being the right kind of group, being filled with relatively mature individuals, we didn't have any of those issues. So it actually worked out really, really well. And again, the purpose of the scenario was primarily to do something fun, to do something different, really switch it up, and on account of the holiday, that provided us with the excuse to do that. So when you're doing a cooperative scenario, there are some things you have to think about, and the big thing I feel is really how are you going to let the players distribute themselves? You're going to let them sit around one table? Are you going to confine them to their own individual room on Discord or a study carrel or whatever it may be? What then do you allow them to talk about? If they're all at the same table, are they allowed to talk about the game? Are they allowed to act on intelligence that they would not normally have? That's probably something I would never do because that really spoils the Kriegsspiel, in my opinion. At that point, you're no longer playing Kriegsspiel. Um, but you can allow them, I think, to talk and chatter and come up with ideas. Hey, maybe you should defend at this location. Maybe you should, retreat behind this stream here instead of defending out in front of it. And that's not entirely unreasonable. And one of the ways I kind of get around that is I figure, hey, each commander in the field would have a staff. Each general would have, a major or a colonel or a captain or somebody, even a lieutenant, saying, "Hey, sir, why don't we do this instead?" So that's a reasonable thing that would happen, and that did happen historically. And having everybody around the table simply simulates your staff. What's critical, of course, is that it's your own decision. Um, One thing that I've left out in the battle description is this commander here, the commander that was here at Fort Ethan Allen, he was the first person converted, so I made him into the zombie commander, and he commanded his own unit after it was flipped. He didn't command all the zombies. Umpires still ran zombies in the north and in the south, but he ran the zombie attack in the center, which was fine. You want to make sure that players always have something to do. You really don't want to eliminate a player from a game ever unless either they are some kind of a problem or they deliberately and intentionally do something so foolish that you almost can't help it. I had one guy one time in a face-to-face Kriegsspiel say, "I want to do a charge and I'm going to lead from the front." Total low Armistead style at Gettysburg, right? Pickett's charge. And I'm like, "Really? Do you really want to do it?" And so then I made him roll a die to determine if he got hit. He got hit. Then I made him roll a die to determine whether he lived or died, and he died. So I eliminated him from the game. Now, he was prone to making silly decisions like that, so I was okay with doing that, and that was the consequence of what he did. And the crazy thing is, the hit was only on a 1, and the death was only on a 1, and he rolled snake eyes, basically. So what do you do, right? I think the Kriegsspiel gods have spoken at that point. The other alternative is you can let them come back, let them resurrect as a successor or take another command or whatever. Felix himself did a very good job commanding the units here. And when Felix was basically killed here at this bridge, he had the Gatling guns going and everything, but he died at the bridge. I allowed him then to command a Union force that was holding the line right here. I allowed him to command these troops. And I would have turned him into a zombie commander, but we were only 1 or 2 turns away from the end, so it's kind of like, what's the point of that? So I let him make 1 or 2 decisions regarding the disposition of these troops, which again were quickly overrun, and then that was that. That was the end of the game. Obviously, the zombies were going to win, partly because they were converting the civilians. What was really interesting, though, was they actually did a good job holding off the zombies. They bought a lot of time, and they killed a lot of the zombies, actually, way more than I expected they would. And if not for the zombies being able to turn civilians into zombies, I think the Union would have won the day. They had these really cool Gatling guns. Let me see if I can find them. Where are the Gatling guns? I don't know where the markers went. We may have removed them because I think they all eventually got overrun. Oh, I don't know where they are. I could load the original module real quick so you can see the little markers. Let's do that. Let's load the original module, and I'll show you the Gatling guns. And here they are. So we had these really cool Gatling gun markers, and the Gatling gun would throw 3 black dice, and all the results apply. So, it was easy for each one of these to throw a hit. And that's exactly what they did. And so, they tore up a lot of the zombies. We even had situations where 3 hits at a time were rolled, and 3 zombies were wiped out. So it was pretty cool how it went. It was a fun battle, though. Fun battle. So the other thing I wanted to talk about in the context of this game, I think I was going to talk about doing fun Kriegsspiels. I don't have my notes, but I'm pretty sure that was what I was going to talk about. Kriegsspiel is typically pretty serious and straight-laced, where there's a lot of rules and protocols. It's being played as a military training exercise. And folks, I don't know anything on the planet that is more serious than military operations, because that's life or death. The soldiers themselves and the personnel may joke about it. They may be really into the dark humor. And afterwards you might, have a chuckle about something or whatever. But in real life, I can't think of anything more serious other than what might happen in a doctor's office or a surgeon's, an operation room or whatever, where they do surgery on people. There's just not stuff more serious than that. Maybe a courtroom, superior court in a criminal case. That's as serious as it gets, folks. Um, Kriegspiel, you generally want it to be serious because you do want to kind of underline that. You want to have respect and awareness of what you're doing, even though you're playing it as a game, even though you're even doing it as entertainment. It still deserves to be handled with some kind of seriousness because you're learning the art of war by experience, and you're not really there to be a jokester or ham it up, which is really hard for me because I tell jokes all the time. I could go to the gallows and I'd crack a joke. You know, that's just me. But we don't really want players, dressed up in full, 19th century military uniforms. Someone dressed up as Napoleon, someone as Wellington. We don't really want any of that stuff. We just want you to sit down and really think about, what decisions should I be making. We want players not to throw away their units. We want them to think about their units as, hey, these are real people. What orders should I actually give to preserve the life of my units? And some players do that really well. Eli Gray being one of them. Eli is excellent at that. He's a Marine who can read, and he takes care of his units. He does not commit his troops unless he believes they can win in a situation. And I have seen him exit a fight when he thinks he's at a serious disadvantage, which is absolutely brilliant. That's the way Kriegspiel should be played. A lot of war gamers, they see it too much as a game, and they're like, okay, take all my units, put them in one stack of Doom, and push that Doom stack into the enemy, and oh, look, I won. Boy, am I Napoleon. Wow. Really? We don't want players to do that. We want them to feel attached to the units. That's why these units have names on them. That's why these units have, names and such, because we notice that when units have these particular names, players tend to play them a little differently. They begin to feel a little more attached to them, and they play them a little bit more seriously. I know it's a crazy thing, right? But it's psychology and it works. And there we have it. And this is why we put the players into the game, putting their name on the markers. That helps everybody all around, by the way. That's always a good thing. But yeah, we put them into the game, and there you have it. So, all that being said, that being said, that Kriegspiel is supposed to be a serious exercise and people should take it seriously, does not mean you can't have some kind of fun. And I think it's appropriate every now and then to do something kind of crazy, blow off some steam, and again, have fun. I think that's appropriate. We have had some players kind of push back on the idea, saying, no, no, I don't want it to be like a kid's game, kind of thing. I want it to be, they want to keep the serious, reverent flavor, the decorum, I suppose. That makes sense. That's fine. I get that. And I'm generally right there. But I do think occasionally you need to do something fun, just like occasionally you also need to do something big. So, that's why each year we're going to try to do at least one large kind of what I would call an invitational event or something where we're going to invite everybody from all around the world to come and play in a monster game. I want to do that once a year. And probably around every Halloween, I want to do something kind of fun, just like this, once a year. So, how do you not do zombies, though? I tell you, zombies are such low-hanging fruit. I would rather not always do zombies. They're too cliche. Nonetheless, it works. And again, this was just a very fun little battle that we had. We ran it in about 3.5 hours, so it went pretty quickly. We didn't have to go around doing screenshots and everything. I actually allowed everybody to sit around the umpire table, so they were able to watch as I rolled the dice, so they could see the results in real time. And it just made everything go so much faster. And I think that's appropriate when you're running a fun game like this. In any other scenario, no, you're going to have to break them out. You're going to have to give them individual reports. You may or may not let them see the die rolls. I tend to let the players see the dice roll. I'll even bring both sides into the same room, share my screen, and say, okay, guys, watch the dice roll. And I'll roll the dice, and then they know the result instantly. And that saves on some reporting time, and I think it's more fun for the players. Nonetheless, that's just kind of my style and my approach, how I do it. Some players don't like that I do it that way. Others do. It's just a flavor thing, you know. Um, but what you should have as a sense of this is there's different ways to run a Kriegsspiel, and you always have to act in accord with the situation, right? You're going to tailor your approach to running the game to the purpose of the game and the kind of the game that you're running. So if you're running a cooperative game, you can have people kind of huddled around the same table. You can decide how much you want to limit their conversation or maybe not at all. You set those rules, and generally speaking, Kriegsspiel players will follow those rules. So there you have it. But you have to think about these things and make these decisions beforehand. Um, and it's okay to have fun and to be relaxed every now and then, because if you get really strict, that adds time, that adds minutia to the system, and the minutia kills. However, you do need a certain standard in order for it to be Kriegsspiel and in order for the players to have that Kriegsspiel moment, to have that kind of fun that's associated with Kriegsspiel. Otherwise, you might as well just sit around and play any old board game. So you do want to keep it distinct. So if you want to do fun stuff like this, I think it's fine. But don't do it all the time. Just every once in a while. It's like a treat kind of thing, right? You run it and then that's it. You got to go back to doing it the way you did. Otherwise, I think it becomes too silly. The players will get too bored, and you won't have people come back and play again and again. Anyway, quiet day today. It is, of course, a holiday. It's Halloween, so October 31st of 2021, and we'll be rapidly moving towards the holiday season. Actually, to me, Halloween kicks off the holiday season, and that will probably interfere a little bit with our schedule, but I'll also continue to do special episodes. I'll try to always get on at 9 o'clock on the dot for Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel. That's our usual time. And again, if you have topic ideas or questions or anything, post it in the YouTube, post it in the comments, wherever, or you can email or message us. Remember, we have our Patreon. And again, if you subscribe to our Patreon uh, today, you will get our special. You'll get our special. What do you call it? Episode where we're going to talk about the dice in the brigade system, and that will help people to have a little bit more insight into how that works. So, all of that's greatly appreciated, and your support also helps the International Kriegsspiel Society. So there we have it. Thank you.